All right, this is John Hansen. Welcome to the Bodybuilding Legends Show. We are at episode number 3, and today our special guest is Mike Katz. Mike Katz, of course, was one of the premier bodybuilders in the 1970s. He was part of that original Gold's Gym crew, and Mike was also one of the stars of the movie Pumping Iron. If you've ever seen that movie, Mike had a very prominent role in that movie where he competed in the Mr. Universe contest against Ken Waller. And Mike is going to give us a long interview about some of his recollections from the bodybuilding years in the 1970s, training with Arnold Schwarzenegger, winning the 1970 Mr. America and the 1972 Mr. World. Mike's going to talk about his rivalry with Ken Waller, which, of course, if you've seen the movie Pumping Iron, was very emphasized in that movie. He's going to talk about what he really thought about the movie Pumping Iron, and also what really happened to his T-shirt that was stolen by Ken Waller in that movie. So we got a great interview coming up with Mike Katz on the Bodybuilding Legends Show. We're going to take a short break to hear from our sponsors, and we'll be right back with our interview with Mike Katz. All right, welcome back to the Bodybuilding Legends Show, and my guest today is the legendary bodybuilder Mike Katz. Mike was the 1970 IFBB Mr. America and the 1972 IFBB Mr. World, and he was also featured in the book and the movie Pumping Iron. Mike, how you doing?
Great. It's great to finally, after the holidays, get a chance to sit down and talk with you and be able to enjoy our friendship and your viewership.
Yeah, it is. I know we were supposed to have you on a couple weeks ago, and a lot of our fans of the Bodybuilding Legends Show was looking forward to hearing your conversation. So I'm glad we finally got a chance to talk to you. Well, Mike, let's start from the very beginning. I, along with millions of other people, have seen the movie Pumping Iron, and I know you were featured pretty prominently in that movie. And one of the things you said in the movie was that you started off as a football player with the New York Jets. When did you start weight training, and when did you start competing in bodybuilding?
Well, I'm 70 now, so if you go back to when I was a kid your age, 15 or 16 years old.
I wish.
You look that young. I had an opportunity, unfortunately, to be picked on. A lot of kids, like I tried to explain in the movie, and a lot of kids go through a difficult, challenging time when they're growing up from a boy to a man. And in my neighborhood, I didn't have the right last name at a Catholic church on a street corner up the street, and with a Jewish last name, and the amount of anti-Semitism that would occur from that. I remember once a woman next door who was didn't have kids and was a widow, and she was a very cruel woman. And one day when I was maybe 9 or 10 years old, she called me a kike.
Wow.
And I really didn't know what that word meant, so I went and asked my father. And my father was so angry, and I never saw my father mad ever like that in his life. I mean, he stormed out the house and went next door and gave that lady a lecture on never using that word in front of me again.
Wow.
That would be, I'm sure, like the N word if you were black, or some other derogatory ethnic slur. But I can remember not only my father being on my side, but I also had this thing of that prejudice that comes from some people.
Right.
And, beyond the religious part of it and the neighborhood part of it and getting picked on and kind of being fat and 4 eyes, like I said in the movie, with my glasses and my hair wasn't the right style. I mean, I didn't have a great self-esteem, being made fun of, and the girls not liking me, and just trying to kind of identify who I was and what I was. And, I went to a movie. It would be similar a few years ago to when Arnold made his first movie. And at that time, it wasn't Arnold, it was Steve Reeves. And instead of Conan, it was Hercules. And being impressionable at 11 or 12 and seeing this unbelievable man who I'd never seen that kind of a build before, pulling with chains the pillars of the Roman Empire down with this superhuman strength. I was really influenced by that. I also was influenced by my father, who was a real athlete and fan, and his friends used to always come over and pat me on the head, and they would say, what do you want to be when you grow up? And at 10 or 11, I would say, I want to be a pro football player. And I'm sure, jokingly, that's something a lot of kids want to do. And obviously at 10 or 11, these gentlemen that were my father's friends never took me serious. How could you? It's everybody's dream to do that.
Right.
So, the dreams of being respected, having a good body and losing some of the baby fat, and also being a professional football player. Obviously, you had to go to high school first and prove yourself, and then college. I was in a position to have some early goals in my life, along with respecting my health education teacher in 7th grade, Mr. Grossa in Hansen. So I had my like climbing the mountain kind of goals set for myself at an early age, to be a great bodybuilder, to be a great football player, and be a teacher. Those were my aspirations. So I, set out on that trail and the journey to start accomplishing those. And back in the day, there was no real, other than the YMCA's, if you had one, there really wasn't any place to lift other than your basement.
Right.
And, you'd buy a weeder, courses, with Clarence Ross, who was a star back in the day, in the 50s, and George Eicherman. You'd buy from Weeder the courses, you'd put them on the wall, and then you'd copy the different pictures of what exercises to do on what day.
Right.
And I remember sort of borrowing, sort of like I never returned borrowing, like stealing a few plastic or metal milk cases, that were on the side of the road. And I got a 2x12 board, and that was my bench. So I had 2 milk cases that they used to put milk in back in the 50s. So I had my own little gym. I had the posters on the wall, and I actually started to, with really no training and no help, I started to get better and stronger, because it was probably just at that point, when you're 13, where the hormones start kicking in and you start getting the secondary male characteristics. So, in the day, I wanted to play football. There was no organized football, so you basically had a gang fight in your backyard with a neighborhood kid, and that was like the football that you learned back in the 50s, because there was no organized football. So I started getting stronger, and started dominating the football games in the backyard when I was a little kid, could run through people and break tackles, and I was getting stronger, and I guess it sort of went through my head that, working out with weights was going to get me a lot of improvement in what I wanted to do. Also, back in the day, the most successful ad in the history of print advertising was Charles Atlas.
Right.
And that was in every comic book, and up until recently, that same ad that started in the 40s went all the way through into 2000, which was the 98-pound weakling who got sand kicked in his face by the He-Man, who walked by with all the girls admiring him. And, when you're little, even, I would say probably as an adult, it would be hard to admit it, But as a little kid, you could kind of at least admit it to yourself. That sounds pretty good. Let me do this Charles Atlas course.
Right.
Let me not get sand kicked in my face or bullied anymore, and let me have all the beautiful girls. I mean, that even as an adult sounds pretty good. So, I got even more enticed to weight training, and I got better. And as I got better, high school, then I started playing football, not in the neighborhood, but now I was a sophomore in high school because there was no freshman year, and I started playing, high school football. The coaches back in the 50s would say, you can't lift weights.
Right.
I remember I could throw a ball, at 15 years old, I was throwing at almost 90 miles an hour.
Wow.
As a 15-year-old, and I had a professional player named Bob Bothelston who played with Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
And he said I threw harder at 15 than he did in the major leagues.
Wow.
So I was a good baseball player, but the baseball coach at the high school said, if you lift weights, you can't play baseball. You get muscle bound, which we all know about that misnomer. So I had to play track because I couldn't play baseball. It broke my father's heart because I probably would have, out of all the sports, been a better baseball player than any bodybuilder or football player. But needless to say, I played track to support my football improvement. And I did like 9 events, like decathlon,
mm-hmm.
and the 100, the 220, and shot putting, high jump, discus. So I was really able to develop a keen balance and strength. And then I became good enough in high school to be an All-American high school player and was recruited to go to West Point and Boston College and Richmond University on scholarships, but I wanted to stay home. I was a homebody kind of person, probably kind of a big baby and didn't want to leave my mother who I wasn't trying to get away. A lot of kids try to get away from their parents. I, to this day, wish my parents were still alive because I never wanted to get away from them.
Right.
We had a great college team that had people playing professional football right in New Haven called Southern Connecticut State College, which is now a university. And I figured, if I'm going to play professional football, since we've got 3 guys playing in the NFL from my college, I could go to school at home, live at home, have all the support I needed, and still, if I'm good enough, be able to be a great college and professional player.
Mm-hmm.
So lifting weights, I kind of broke through, and the football coach and the track coach really didn't understand what weight training was, but they knew I was getting faster and stronger. I was the fastest guy in the National Football League as a offensive or defensive lineman. And here, I'm a white guy, being able to beat, any ethnic group in my position. I was running with full equipment back in 1968, 69 when we won the Super Bowl. I was running a 4.640 with full equipment on a grass field, not a tracksuit with cleats on AstroTurf. So I probably, that would have been a 4.5 or a 4.4. I could dunk a basketball at 270 pounds.
Wow.
So I had good attributes to being a football player and an athlete. So I kept training, and in high school I was young. I think I was maybe 15 or 16. I went to my first bodybuilding contest even while I was playing football, because I trained at the local Y, and there was guys that were really good. A guy named Joe Laporte. That was back in the Joe Abinda days,
mm-hmm.
when Joe Abinda was in the AAU, and I was going in IFBB contests. And I had a guy in Meriden named Joe Laporte, who was probably one of the best bodybuilders, similar to the John DeCola. John DeCola was a Mr. America for Weider back in, I think, the year before I won in 70. I think he was 69.
Yeah, he was,
Zane,
right.
68.
Mm-hmm.
And then DeCola was 69. He came from Massachusetts. So this guy was like as good as him. And I had an opportunity to hitchhike. When I was 14 years old, I would hitchhike 30 miles a day to go to the Meriden YMCA in Meriden to train with Joe Laporte, because I knew training with him I'd become better. So here, in those days it wasn't dangerous to hitchhike. A lot of people did.
Right.
And it's just and basically I was lucky because the same guy, kind of picked me up every day who was going to Meriden, and then I usually got the same guy coming home. So it's pretty neat that, 30 miles a day to hitchhike to go to YMCA in Meriden, which is a town in Connecticut.
Wow, that's crazy.
So I know I'm going kind of back and forth with a lot of things, but hopefully the audience can understand sort of where I came from, what motivated me to start. In college, I was good enough to be all conference, and I was signed as a free agent with the New York Jets in '67 and played all the way through almost when they won the Super Bowl in '69. I was ready. I was married that summer of the Super Bowl season, and I was also got my draft notice for Vietnam. So it was kind of a tenuous situation. I went to college to be a health education teacher, which I said earlier because my 7th grade idol was an ex-Marine who was a health teacher, and I wanted to be like him back when I was 12 years old. So I'm saying, here I am married. I had a knee operation, which may have curtailed my football career. I'm looking at the draft. I'm educated to be a teacher. I'm going to be far more valuable teaching health education for 35 years with substance abuse, and suicide, and teen pregnancy. I got more to offer than, going to fight in Vietnam. And obviously, there is some guilt. I didn't go to Canada. I didn't burn my draft card. I legitimately got a teacher deferment, and I know I affected tens of thousands of kids' lives in a positive way, coaching and teaching. But still, there is a little bit of hesitancy in reference to some of my friends coming back in flag-draped coffins from Vietnam.
Right.
And that bothers me a little bit. And what I'm doing now is one of the other things I'm really passionate about is cars, and especially street rod, high-performance types of cars. I have a small car collection, and I'm now producing for the Air Force for recruiting. I'm producing a automotive tribute to the P-51 Mustang, which was the plane that helped to win World War II. This is sort of my way of giving back to the military when I didn't give my life in Vietnam and taught school. It's sort of my passion to give back to the military the respect that they deserve by helping recruit kids, with the hook being the car that will go on tour throughout the United States.
Right.
If you go online and you look at the other car that I produced, is the Pumping Iron tribute car. Matter of fact, that's a 32 Ford. It's a highboy convertible that's got a blown and injected small block in it. It's got all the murals along the sides of the movie Pumping Iron.
Oh, cool.
So the most famous slides from the film are on the sides of the car. And it's pretty neat. If the listeners go to Mike Katz Pumping Iron tribute car, there's a 15-minute clip from Ohio. About 6 years ago, Arnold and Franco uncovered the car at the trade show.
Okay.
It's pretty neat. I remember Franco telling Arnold, I look better in these slides than you two. And he's blowing up the hot water bottle in one of the slides.
Right.
And he goes, look, Arnold, there's me blowing up the hot water bottle because he did that in the movie Pumping Iron to show how strong he was. So, my career goes in a lot of different directions, from bodybuilding to football to teaching, to my admiration for the military and producing, show cars.
Right.
And I have 5 Planet Fitnesses as well.
Right.
So when we used to be World Gym, and then we changed 10 years ago. We thought that Planet Fitness had a better business plan than World Gym did. World Gym was a license agreement to use the name. Planet Fitness is a real franchise like Dunkin' Donuts and McDonald's. And there's over 900 worldwide, and within 3 years, they say there'll be 2,000. They're opening up about 300 clubs a year.
Wow.
Planet Fitness, for $10 a month, and it's they're beautiful $1 million clubs. They're not heavy duty clubs. You're not going to, scream and yell and squat 600, 700 pounds. It's, more of a beginner type of a gym where you feel real safe and comfortable without feeling hassled or ridiculed by bullies. back in when I retired in '76, I went in the Olympia. I think I was second to Waller.
Right.
And then I kind of said, that's it. I'm retiring. And then I did come back in, I think, 80 or 82, and I did come back to compete. And I was able to beat Waller, even though I didn't place high. My goal was to come in natural. I was drug tested natural. I'm on stage with people, who I know were not drug tested. And it was just an ego thing for me to know I could be naturally good enough to compete against guys who had no limits in reference to how good they were going to get.
Right.
And I beat Waller. So, here I am, retiring, knowing that I beat Waller, knowing I went on stage drug free.
Right.
And, I had kids to bring up. My son was born in 1970. Now he's like 12 years old in 1982. And I said, that's it. I just got to concentrate on bringing my kids up.
Right.
But I still judge. I judge all over the world. I judge the Arnold. I judge the Olympia. I'm involved still with writing articles, and this particular company called Ground Floor. You can friend. It's called on Facebook. Friend my son. That's my son Mike, and I on Facebook, Mike Katz, and we're online all the time preaching what we believe in nutritionally and with the products that Dr. Lehman has produced. I lost 40 pounds in the last 3 months. And I feel like I've been reborn again.
Wow. Mike, let's go back to your bodybuilding career. I was looking on musclememory.com, and they said you did the 1964 Teenage Mr. America, got 4th place. Was that your first bodybuilding show as a teenager?
No, that I had competed in other teenage competitions, but not in the national show.
Okay.
So, and it's interesting, Dennis Tenorino won that day. And I had a great time. I sat next to Paul Anderson. He did a strength exhibition.
Oh, really? Okay.
And I sat on a bench, like a bench press bench, and his rear end, sitting on the bench, he took up all the way from the stanchion of where you would pick the weight up. He sat against the stanchion, and he had just about enough room for my rear end at the end of the bench.
Wow.
He had the Dixie Derrick. He was considered the strongest man that ever lived, Paul Anderson. And as they said, that was a memorable thing. Not only Tenorino, God bless Dennis, winning. Now I was okay with that because I did very good. There was another guy named Dotrell, and he was a good amateur AAU guy. If you go back historically, I'm not sure who was in 3rd, but at that point, to place in the top 5 in the national teenage show, I was happy with that because I was, I played football all the way up until 69, and I won Mr. America in 1970,
right?
And it competed maybe 3 or 4 times in Mr. America while I was playing with the Jets. So
really? Wow.
Here I got a bodybuilder's body, and I'm on the football field. And today it's, you see some of these guys who are so ripped, some of the linebackers, and
right.
Just like genetic freaks,
Right.
I was like the only guy that really, my roommate, who was named Steve Chomasak, he was a 65-foot shot putter from Syracuse.
Mm-hmm.
He was a defensive lineman. And I remember one day, there was a guy, Sherman Plunkett, for Jet fans. Sherman Plunkett, he was like 380 pounds, maybe 6'2". He was an offensive tackle. He had 9 ripples in the back of his head. He had it shaved, and I used to count. I said, Mr. Plunkett, let me count those lines in the back of your skull. Well, my friend Steve Chomasak, one day in practice with Weave Eubank was the coach, he took this 380-pound offensive tackle, lifted him with his hands underneath his shoulder pads. He lifted him off the ground.
Wow.
Threw him. Well, obviously at that point, seeing that, he ended up at least 2 or 3 years for the Jets for that one movement against Sherman Plunkett.
Right.
So those are some kind of cool stories. But we were the only ones, Chomasak and myself. Al Atkinson was the middle linebacker. He did a little bit of lifting, but beyond that, even then, they were just starting to accept the fact that weight training would be okay for football, and that's 69.
Wow. So what years did you play with the Jets then, Mike?
I graduated from college in 66, summer 66. So then
Okay.
I played through the 67 season, then I came back to the 68, 69. I had got injured against the Patriots, and I had a knee that should have been operated on. The great surgeon, James Nicholas, whose son now I think is a team physician with the Jets, he had operated on Namath 8 times. He was a team surgeon,
Okay.
famous surgeon. And I kind of egotistically, they called me Superman because they couldn't believe when I would come into the shower, somebody could be built like me
Right.
and run like the wind. And especially the black guys, they really loved. And I got along good with them because many of the players were Texans from down south, and they kind of hung out. Curly Johnson and Pete Lamons and these guys from Texas, they kind of hung out in their group. And here's some, Jewish kid from a small college in the Northeast. I had nobody to hang around with, and I tended to like Merlin Biggs and Sherman Plunkett. And I had a good time hanging out with minorities like myself.
Right.
And welcomed by them and still do. Winston Hill, who is Willis Reed's brother-in-law, Winston Hill was a great 6'7", 310-pound offensive tackle, and he was all pro. I don't know if he's in the Hall of Fame, but he's in the Ring of Circle at Jet Stadium in New York, and he was shout out to him if anybody ever knows who Winston Hill is and says hello for me. I would love that.
Okay. So when did you first go to Gold's Gym out in California? When did you make the pilgrimage? We just did an interview with Bill Grant, and he said he would see you over there in the summers every year out in California.
Joe Weider at the time was looking for, he had Dave Draper, kind of Larry Scott had gone past, won the Olympian. It was now Sergio Oliva.
Right.
So Sergio Oliva was like the guy to beat. So he knew that eventually, if he brings Arnold from Austria, that he's sort of like the Great White Hope.
Right.
Here he can market the magazine and he's handsome. Not that Sergio isn't. It's just, business is business, and he just felt, of course, that sort of a guy. And it's interesting who could speak. Arnold, don't get mad at me. Who could speak better English, Sergio? With his Cuban accent, or Arnold with his German accent.
Right.
Maybe that was a toss-up, although maybe I have to say Arnold spoke a little bit clearer English than Sergio did.
Right.
But, Arnold was going to sell more magazines than Sergio. I mean, it's a fact. And, became good enough to beat Sergio. And he needed a training partner. And in Austria, Joe Weider asked Arnold who he wanted to train with, who was sort of a person he wanted to meet. So Arnold said, Mike Katz, Big Mike, I want him out here.
Oh, really? Okay.
So Weider got in touch with me because I used to train with Joe Weider before he moved to California. His organization was in Union City, New Jersey.
Right.
And he lived in a high-rise luxury apartment right near the United Nations on the east side of Manhattan.
Okay.
I would go down there and I would talk to him. I would train with him. And I'll never forget, he pushed me once to use 110-pound dumbbells to do curls.
Wow.
110, a barbell 110 is enough.
Yeah.
And he was like Bear Bryant or Vince Lombardi. Oh, Mike, I know you can do more. The 85 start pitching weights. Joe, 85, what are you trying to kill me? I got up to over 100 pounds, alternate swinging,
right.
Dumbbell curls. And he loved that.
Yeah.
And when he moved to California, he wanted me out there. So at the end of my teaching in June, I would pack up, go to California for a month. Live with him and train with him and Franco, although nobody could train with Franco. Franco didn't know what he was doing. Nothing against Franco. Franco just knew that what he was doing, which made no sense to anybody, but he knew that it was working for him.
Right.
So it's one of those things where everybody would scratch their head. He doesn't do any warm-ups. He starts with 500 pounds of squat. And the rest of us are going, oh, yeah, right, we're going to start with 500 and not 3 or 4 warm-up sets. But Franco was like a genetic freak.
Yeah.
So, Arnold says, look, if I'm not here, don't train with Franco. You can't trust him. But he did put me in Franco's car once because he couldn't drive me someplace. So he says, well, you could trust Franco. He's a great driver. And everybody at Gold's Gym, was kind of rolling their eyes, and I couldn't figure out why they were rolling their eyes about Franco's driving ability.
Right.
Arnold's got a Volkswagen. He had to have a German car. Franco's got an Alfa Romeo because he had to have an Italian car. Well, by the time I got to where I had to go, I'm pretty white, but I was whiter than a ghost. I don't think there was ever 4 wheels ever on the ground once I stepped into the car. And I can remember the following day, Arnold says, hey, Mike, how was the ride with Franco? And the whole Gold's Gym, everybody started cracking up. Gun, you suckered me again.
Right.
And not only, he gave me the right advice not to train with Franco, but he didn't give me the right advice about not to drive with him.
What did you think of Arnold when you first met him, Mike? Did you know him from the magazines before you met him in person?
Not really. He wasn't really, maybe a little, but the stars back then were Dave Draper,
right?
And Larry Scott, even though he was before me,
right?
Frank Zane, Arnold came in. I remember Arnold got beat by Zane in Florida.
Yeah, in '68.
Because he was really pudgy.
Yeah,
and he wasn't really refined like he became. And Frank Zane taught him a good lesson about, coming in a contest smooth.
Right.
But we hit it off immediately. It was almost like we were kindred spirits and brothers. We could use I had stronger legs, and I was stronger in my bench. He was stronger in curls.
Mm-hmm.
So where I needed help was being motivated by him being stronger in my weak areas. And then when he would falter on squats and leg presses, and I could do almost 100 and something pounds more than him, he couldn't understand it and would be motivated to try to get his legs better. So it was a perfect, and we're about the same height and about the same weight. And, he also knew that he could pick on me and get away with it. So he had a perfect fall guy.
Hey, they made a statue of Mike. That is a good one, Mike.
Involved and continue to be a friend. I just got an award from the March of Dimes, which is one of the greatest charities because they're for for babies who are premature.
Right.
March of Dimes now, and I got a Legend Award from them this past year, and Arnold sent a beautiful tribute on tape. So when they introduced my award, Arnold introduced me over a big screen,
oh, nice,
a projector, and told the world, what he thought of me, which was at least nice things, because maybe he could have said that would have been embarrassing, but he kept it on a professional level. So
what was the atmosphere like at Gold's Gym back in those days, Mike? At the original Gold's Gym in the 1970s?
Yeah, and that was on Pacific. It was on Pacific Avenue there. It was about 3 blocks from the beach.
Yeah.
I'm up the beach. Bodybuilders in those days, we stuck together because everybody was against us. The guy who was an athlete who maybe didn't have a great body, he would say, we're narcissistic and muscle bound and can't touch our toes, because even athletes at the time were kind of jealous of us. And, other people, intellectuals, might say, well, this guy must be gay, or, how could somebody just look at themselves all day?
Yeah.
Because they really didn't understand that what we were doing. And what we were doing, the movie and the book Pumping Iron explained that were just regular guys, you know, Arnold and Franco and Louis and the people in the book, myself. We just have a dream to be the best built person in the world, not climb Mount Everest or become a professional football player or a great opera singer.
Right.
We're just normal people that sort of have a sport that really isn't understood. So the movie, I think, really created a tolerance for what we were doing. But up to then, I mean, we had to stick together.
Uh-huh.
Nobody was making any money. I think Mr. Olympia was $1,000. You could get maybe $100 to do a posing exhibition.
Yeah.
So, you know, like, nobody was making a lot of money. It wasn't a career until Arnold was able, with his business sense, to be able to market himself and control Weider and have Weider understand how valuable he was. Sort of like Joe Namath when he got the $400,000, which is nothing today. But back in the day when I was playing, you know, $18,000 you could make as an offensive lineman.
Yeah.
Now a school teacher was making $6,000, so it was 3 times more than a school teacher would make. But here's a guy that comes in and makes $400,000.
Yeah.
Now, when they did that to try to get the AFL, you know, incorporated within the NFL, and then when the Jets beat the Colts in Super Bowl III after Namath guaranteed the victory, it really brought the AFL right up even. And then they combined leagues, and it's now the National Football League with the American and National Conference within those leagues. So, you know, it was, you know, there was always a little bit of gamesmanship, you know, with me and Waller. But a lot of that was because we were competitors. So they were able to look at me beating him for Mr. World, then him beating me for Mr. Universe, and then him winning in the contest in South Africa, and looking at my disappointment and not knowing that he had stolen the T-shirt. And I didn't know. And it's interesting, that whole T-shirt incident, it took me 40 years, 30 years. Arnold came out with, you know, the real truth about the filming of the movie Pumping Iron and what really happened. You know, when he came clean, that section with Robbie Robinson and Ken Waller on the football field throwing football with Roger Callard, that was done 6 months after the movie was shot.
Really? Wow.
So, you know, they were able to edit it as if, you know, the T-shirt got stolen and this is how they did. So it was not the way it really happened, because I played against a guy named Ernie Ladd, who ended up becoming a professional wrestler with WWE.
Right.
And he played for the Houston Oilers, 6'9", 365 pounds. He would turn your helmet around. I saw him do it, so that the face mask was facing the back of your head.
Wow.
I mean, I had nightmares going to bed at night knowing you're going to play the Houston Oilers and Ernie Ladd.
Right.
Now, there was other great ones, too, of course. You know, Bubba Smith was the great defensive tackle for the Colts with Johnny Unitas.
Right.
But, I mean, if I'm not going to be psyched out playing against these killers on a football field, how the hell is Waller going to psych me out?
Right.
I was just looking. I still have that T-shirt. One day, either go in a museum.
Oh, really?
Or hopefully Arnold will have enough motivation to make a bodybuilding museum, like the Hall of Fame for baseball, because we don't have a museum. And I will the T-shirt, you know, and my belt, which I wore in the movie too, to the museum. But if not, then, you know, maybe one day it'll be on eBay. I don't know if it'll fetch much money.
So did it really happen, Mike? I mean, did you were you really missing your T-shirt? Is that when they?
It was my lucky T-shirt, and I was looking for that. And the content, it's interesting if you kind of look at the way it was done with the filming.
Yeah.
When I go at the very end of my segment, when I go to walk up the steps, and the camera shoots the back of my head, and I say, and I've got to find my T-shirt. I got to go shake Waller's hand because I didn't know he stole it, and I got to find the T-shirt. You didn't hear that coming out of my mouth because they were on the back of my head. They verbally put that in to that particular part because that's how you make movies.
Yeah.
You see a blue T-shirt around?
In reality, the filmmakers made it more than it was.
Now, you know, when the movie came out, it was released at the Plaza Theater in New York, and it had a bunch of, you know, sort of, in a way, kind of washed up movie stars and stuff that
Right.
were there. They weren't, you know, it wasn't John Wayne or something like that.
Right.
It was just, you know, some people who had made some movies, and they kind of gathered them up, put them in an evening count, and they went to the opening. And it was in the Plaza Theater, right next to the Plaza Hotel. There was lights in the sky and all that business. And when I never saw the movie, and they asked me, you know, I love George Butler and Charles Gaines, those are the guys who wrote and directed the movie and stuff. But, you know, I trusted them. And I said, look, you know, you want to give me like $1,000, and I have to sign a release, and I haven't seen the movie. Trust me, they said, you're going to love the movie. Well, you know, being naive and trusting them, those guys stayed at my house when they filmed in Connecticut.
Mm-hmm.
They did the book. What was there not to trust? So I signed the release, and now never saw the film. Now it's, you know, 2 months later, the film is being shown at the Plaza Theater. And I saw how they edited that part with my T-shirt. I walked out of the theater.
Really? Wow.
It probably took me 8 to 10 years to kind of, maybe even longer, because it's still a little stinging.
Really?
Now, even though I'm 70, you would say, get over it.
Yeah.
You know, it's easy for anybody out there to say, get over it. But that, you know, if it depicted me correct, that I was some weak-spirited guy, you know, who was looking for some stupid T-shirt and getting psyched out by it, and then Waller beat me, I would have crushed him.
Right.
I would have crushed him with one hand, let alone worry about a T-shirt. But the way they did it was destructive to my ego and my personality, and I don't think it was a very nice thing to do with people who you trust. Now, have I forgiven them? Sure. Because in the end, I'm talking to you, and I'm not aware of where, you know, Ken is at this point in his life. And I've become sort of a household name in bodybuilding because I was the only guy at the time to have kids, be married, be educated, have a teaching job, play professional football. I had so many things more than Arnold. I mean, Arnold had what? Arnold kind of, you know, didn't have an education at the time, and there's no jealousy. But if you look at what he had and what I had, I mean, I had my kids, I had my wife, I had educated degrees, was a teacher. I had a lot of things that a lot of those guys even today never had.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, and that resonated with the audience, where I became, at least what they tell me, sort of a cult hero from the movie.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people didn't want to be like Arnold. He wouldn't even go to his father's funeral.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't want to be like Louis because, you know, Louis was being controlled by his father, and most people don't like that kind of overseen. Kind of difficult to understand in a way his whole thing in the first place. You know, so he could pick up a car in Sardinia and move it because it's stuck in a parking place.
Mm-hmm.
Now again, what Arnold became and what Franco became, and these people have become very successful people, and it's a tribute to their desire to fulfill other goals, whether it's acting or business or chiropractic medicine.
Right.
But back in that day, most people resonated with me because most people that watched the film were married, had kids, and had to work a job.
Right.
And they lifted weights like I did.
You know, usually I could say, look what I got, Michael, you know, and I put it around his neck, or I give him the trophy for his room. And now I'm away from him for 10 days. And I come home with nothing. You know, I'll tell you, no matter what happens to me in the sport, I always got them. And that's something great to come home to.
It was a way that I could try to gather myself together with such a disappointment. It was at that point, it was a very, very big disappointment in my life. So I kind of gathered my strength from my family, yeah.
So, you know, being angry at the improper editing of the movie, had to take a back seat to having it released and having it become popular. Now it's on Netflix. So
Yeah.
here we go years later or whatever, and now I'm kind of reborn again.
Yeah, well, it's a classic movie, I think, among all bodybuilders, you know. And I think you're right, Mike. I think your involvement in the film and your, you know, showing you in the film, I think, you know, from when I'm reading a lot of the critics, when they reviewed the movie, they said you provided a sort of a human element to bodybuilders, and I think that was the great thing about the movie was that it showed bodybuilders as individual human beings, where before I think the general public must have saw bodybuilders as just a bunch of muscle-bound people who they didn't understand, you know.
Yeah, that's something that's kind of an interesting thought, because I know I've thought that before, but it even puts a little bit more strength to that you know, normal people like Mike Katz can achieve things, and it's not a bunch of wackos that are out there, you know, bouncing around Muscle Beach.
Hey, Mike, let me ask you about Ken Waller, because, you know, they portrayed this big rivalry between you guys, but obviously you knew Ken pretty well, going to Gold's Gym every summer. And we just talked to Bill Grant, and he said Ken Waller wasn't like he was portrayed in the movie. He was a real nice guy. Did you guys have a good relationship, or was there a real rivalry between you?
Well, there was a rivalry, but there was, for me, you know, there was no, I was never jealous of him. You know, the first time, I don't know if he beat me in Mr. International. It was in Tijuana. They had a year. I think it was like 69 or maybe 70. I think he beat me in Mr. International in Mexico, and then I came back in New York and beat him in Mr. World.
Mm-hmm.
So we had a natural rivalry, but, you know, I mean, he's, you know, he kind of like maybe was, I mean, he wasn't beyond, he didn't have a gun to his head to do what he did in the movie. I think that even Bill Grant would say that was part of his persona, is, you know, being, you know, for him to be kind of, to do that wasn't out of context with his personality. It doesn't mean he's a bad person.
Right.
Like Arnold, it doesn't mean he's a bad person. It just is, you couldn't make me do what he did to me. I couldn't do that to him.
Okay.
I would have got down on a football field in a wrestling ring, and I would have attempted to try to kick his ass, you know, before I would have tried to ridicule him and hurt him. But it just doesn't mean he's a bad guy.
You know, back then, that sort of was my nature in a way, but I was all in joking. I considered Mike a friend. A friend of yours, you really don't want to hurt their feelings. At that time, I didn't ever think it was going to come out and be a big deal on a movie screen. You learn later.
Right.
I'm not going to. Would Arnold do what Waller did? Of course, Arnold did that the whole movie. So, I mean, you know, Waller was no more or less involved than Arnold. Arnold, in many cases, did worse things, but he did them in funny ways that you kind of got to laugh, but they were like Don Rickles. I mean, they were still hurtful.
Right.
I remember once when he said, I'm going to give Franco all the wrong advices because he listens to me like I'm his mother.
Right.
That was right in the film. Well, when that film came out, the friendship between Franco and Arnold almost ended. Because, I mean, Franco's got a lot of pride being a strong man,
right,
just like I do being a football player. And then when Arnold says, you know, like, he listens to me like I'm his mother, and I can give him the wrong advice and fool him,
right,
you know, he wasn't very happy with that.
Franco is pretty smart, but Franco is a child.
For me, it was like, I don't care. It was like, it doesn't matter what he says. When I'm on stage, I'm going to show that I'm the best. And I'm still convinced I was at least as good as Arnold. And
that movie caused, not almost, it almost caused the breakup of a friendship with Franco and Arnold, but it caused the breakup of Lou Ferrigno and his father. Lou got, and I don't know the exact story, because I love Louie and his wife, but there was stuff that was none of my business, but I know that there was a falling out after the film. Now, whether it was his second wife or whether it was a business deal that went sour, I don't know. All I know is that he and his father loved each other before and during the film, and after the film, things ended.
Wow.
So that was a sad part of the film.
Yeah.
I have not asked Louis, and neither would I. It's none of my business. All I know is they didn't see each other much, and I know the film did not help their friendship as a father and son, which is sad.
Yeah, yeah. What did you think about Arnold and Sergio Oliva, their rivalry? I mean, I know you were around in 1969 and 1970 when Sergio beat Arnold, and then Arnold beat Sergio. I know a lot of bodybuilding fans are always debating who was better, Sergio or Arnold.
It's interesting, you know, the day that Arnold beat him, I've seen Arnold lose to him because I had competed the same day, because they held Mr. World, Mr. America, and Mr. Olympia. They held all the shows in the same day.
Right.
In the same venue. And I remember on stage, you know, the year Arnold beat him, I think that might have been 1970.
1970, yeah.
Yeah, and I remember, you know, the crowd, because I think Lou Ferrigno, hold on one second. I think Lou Ferrigno, not Lou Ferrigno, let me just get it straight. Sergio Oliva had been twice or three times Mr. Olympia, and Arnold had gotten beat by him once.
Right.
So now they come back again, and Arnold figures, let me use every tactic I can use to try to get an advantage over him. So, you know, being the reigning Mr. Olympia and being in New York and being against, you know, a Cuban American against an Austrian from another country, you know, the crowd at the beginning, you know, was screaming Sergio. Yeah, I mean, 3,000-4,000 people was a big crowd then.
Right.
And it looked as if Sergio kind of had it. There was some Arnold, but I would say at least 60-70% of the audience were screaming Sergio. So they're posing and pose down and whatnot. Then all of a sudden, Arnold, you know, and I was right there. Arnold said, "I'm tired. Why don't we give it a break?" And you know, poor Sergio, like poor me with the T-shirt, you know, and Franco with, you know, his getting screwed around with "I'm your mother, trust me." You know, there Sergio, you know, innocently walks off the stage. Arnold starts to walk off, jumps back on, and starts posing again. It looked like the whole audience went back now to Arnold.
Right.
And Sergio just was like, "What did I do?"
Right.
I don't think he realized it until it was too late that he gave Arnold just enough there in a close fought contest that, you know, Arnold used whatever he needed to use. And he continues to do that today for the most part, except for a couple of missteps there in Arnold's life. He's been pretty much on top of things. So, you know, you kind of feel sorry for Sergio. And then they go to, I think, Essen, they go to Germany, I think the following year. And, you know, I think you need to go look at the photos of that Mr. Olympia. That may have been 71.
72.
You know, you look at the photos and then you tell me. Or you go look at the photos when in Australia, you know, it was Mike Metzer and Arnold and Chris Dickerson and, you know, whoever. And then you can look at the pictures when Franco, you know, won the Mr. Olympia, and you could kind of, I mean, I think the audience in some ways, now I'm a judge, and, you know, your parents who love you in any sport are going to give you the benefit of the doubt. I mean, they just love you. They don't, your parents, I coached hockey in high school when I taught, and, you know, you could put a puck on the goal line where the goalie is. There's a goal line. If the puck goes over the line, it's a goal. You could put a puck on the goal line. You could take the goalie out of a net, and your kid's parents, that kid would come down the ice, and he couldn't put the puck an inch over the goal line with no goalie. But I got Wayne Gretzky. It's my son. He's Wayne Gretzky or Bobby Orr.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't, as a parent, divorce yourself from the love that you've got. And fans, in many cases, can't divorce and shouldn't. They shouldn't. If they think the worst guy in the show should win, that's their right. They paid their money. They have every right to feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
But the real judges, the writers, the photographers, the people who really know the sport, it'd be interesting to look at and ask those people who would have been there and had nothing against or for Arnold or Sergio,
Right.
is to ask those people, the guys that write the magazine in
Right.
Europe,
Right.
and the people who were there. It'd be interesting to get, you look at it and then you tell me. Now, Arnold was not in his best shape in Australia, and he wasn't in his best shape in Essen. The other guys were. So there was a call the other day that helped Dallas win the game
Right.
against Detroit.
Right.
Totally outplayed them. And it was a call that you would have said it was fixed. It's a 15-yard penalty in the red zone. They're going to get a first down, Detroit. They needed to score. There's a necessary roughness of a receiver. They count off the 15 yards. They think about it. Now, did Jerry Jones fix it? Did the NFL fix it because they figured Dallas was going to be a bigger draw in the playoffs than Detroit?
Right.
It was the most ridiculous call in the history of football in a meaningful game, and even the commissioner of the officials said it. So somebody must have got to someplace, or somebody was afraid to make a call, or somebody looked up. So the point is that call shouldn't have been made. Now, should the calls in Australia have been made? Should the call in Essen have been made? I don't know. I remember once trying to qualify for the Mr. Universe, and this is in the Sports Illustrated, so you can go back and you could actually read the Sports Illustrated article that was done on Ferrigno and myself. Ferrigno wasn't in shape. It was the Mr. Universe in Italy, and we were competing in a show, and the winner of that show was going to go to the United States for the Mr. Universe in Italy. Well, Ferrigno wasn't. Now, if we're both in our best shape, is Louis better? Probably. Maybe. Okay, I can deal with it. But he wasn't better. And in the article, Arnold gets quoted and says, well, Louis, when he's in his best shape, could beat Mike. But there was something said that was like the call that was made against the Lions that didn't get called, right?
Oh, you're talking about the Mr. International, right, Mike? The one that was held in California?
Mr. International, and Louis and I can remember the thing clear as day. I mean, maybe if he was in his best shape, sure.
Yeah.
But he wasn't, and I was
smooth,
in great shape.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't beat him. Matter of fact, somebody sent me the movie. I have a movie of that show.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, I have a movie of the show, and I mean, forget it. He's taller, he's bigger.
Yeah.
But he wasn't better that day. If you're smooth, you shouldn't win just because maybe a month later you're better.
Yeah.
You're not better. Like if it's a horse race, even though Secretariat might have lost and maybe it should have won, you don't give the freaking victory because when the flash goes off at the end of a horse race, Ferrigno's finishing behind Secretariat.
Right, right.
But it doesn't happen that way, so it is. It's not sour grapes. It really isn't.
Right.
I love Louis.
Right.
But, it's just interesting how things do happen. But most of the time, to defend myself as a judge, most of the time, there's been times judging, like I want to sneak out the back door, and I'll elbow, Steve Weinberger, who's a good friend, or I'll elbow whoever is sitting next to me. At the time, it would have been Jim Raquel, or it would have been Sandy Rinaldi, the people I judge throughout the world with.
Right.
And I'm saying to Steve or Jimmy Mannion, I'm saying, all hell's going to break loose. Just trust me. They go, what do you mean? I said, look, I've been up on that stage. You guys haven't.
Yeah.
I know this audience. I know what's going to happen. And I said, just wait. And 10 minutes after, or 2 seconds after the guy was crowned Mr. Whatever, the freaking audience, I was going to dive for underneath the table.
Yeah.
Because they went so crazy. Does that mean they're right? No. But it sometimes means that maybe we could have looked a little differently and saw things different than they did.
Yeah.
It just really depends. It's, when it's real close in a show, there are other factors that occur in judges' minds. I mean, we're not computers.
Right.
If you are judging somebody and they're absolutely dead on, and you know that one of the guys is the most detrimental person that you could ever vote for, and you've got to try to take all of this out of your brain, and most of the time we do. But everything does affect everything else.
Yeah.
And when you've got a great representative of a sport who is going to further the sport, and it's time, now, do you want a potential criminal? There's no criminals, or a thug, or a bad person that is not nice to the media, doesn't sign autographs, doesn't show up to posing exhibitions on time. The way you act, and I'm just trying to think of an analogy with Dominican Sue, the guy in the Detroit Lions, and nose tackle. I mean, he's done some vicious, even with football.
Right.
So you say, well, how vicious could a football player? I mean, it's like war.
Right.
Playing football. But he's done things that aren't even allowed in war. He's done such bad things in his life, stepping on people and stuff.
Right.
Now all of a sudden he steps on a guy, and he's got a bad reputation to start with. He's already gotten fined. He's gotten suspended. Well, you know what? You don't have as much. That guy doesn't have as much rope. You don't need a whole lot of rope to hang a guy like that.
Yeah.
Other people are just, they say like Roger Clemens and Andy Pettit. Andy Pettit comes across with a drug issue. He comes across as a nice guy. He's up front. He said he did whatever, and people understand there was a mistake because everybody makes mistakes. Nobody's perfect.
Right.
But then somebody hides it, and there's so much information against them, you just don't respect that guy who continues to lie and fight as you do somebody that comes clean.
Right.
So that sort of does a little tiny bit, maybe a quarter of a percent. I wouldn't even say it does in a quarter of a percent. If it's equal, if either guy can win,
Yeah.
Sometimes it has nothing to do with even personality, because you can have two great guys, and the audience loves both of them, and they're both great. They both would be great standard bearers of an award, but somebody's got to win.
Right.
And that's why there's an odd number of judges. So
Right.
somebody is going to go 4-3 or 6-5 or whatever.
Right. Hey, Mike, let's take a commercial break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk more about some of your great stories from the bodybuilding age.
Terrific.
All right, welcome back to the Bodybuilding Legends Show. My guest today is Mike Katz. Hey, Mike, we were just talking about that 1970 Mr. Olympia, and I wanted to ask you an incident. Didn't Sergio demand to go into the Mr. America that year? The day he was going to compete in the Olympia?
That's a great question, John. I had spent, I think, 3 years, 67 through 69. Matter of fact, Chuck Sipes won one of those years. What a great strongman he was. And then it was Frank Zane, and then it was John DeCola, and then, I had a good chance to win in 1970.
Yeah.
So Sergio's like Cuban. Now, whether he was an American citizen, I'm not sure. But, he basically, sort of threatened the promoters about not going into Mr. Olympia if he couldn't go in Mr. America. And I don't even know at that time if he had his citizenship.
Right.
He might have had a green card or something. So they pacified him, and they said to him, well, we'll give you all the trophies, but just don't go in the contest. So, that was sort of a sidelight of him not ruining my day in the sun.
Yeah.
Because probably would have had to give him back because I don't think he was an American citizen in 1970.
Right.
I don't even know if he must have been, because I know he was a Chicago police officer. So,
Yeah.
Historically, it's hard for me to say whether he was or wasn't. But
Right.
Tommy Minicello, who's one of my group, he was the guy that owned Mid-City Gym.
Yeah.
He promoted all the contests then in New York at the Town Hall and at the Brooklyn Academy of Music. And
Yeah.
those were great days. And Tommy always had my back, him and Ed Jubenville, when he was still alive from Massachusetts. They were just great, great, great people in my life.
Mike, there was another story, and I think I told you about this the first time we talked on the phone. There was a book called Arnold Schwarzenegger Conversations, and they talked about a story with you and Arnold at the grocery store, and you bought a rump roast for a dinner or for a barbecue or something. Tell that story if you would.
Oh man, these are all great things for my autobiography, but I might as well give a sneak preview. Then people might say, "Why don't you write a book?" Because I've got a million stories.
Yeah.
And some of them are really, really personal. That one wasn't that personal in a way, because how personal can it be when you're in a supermarket?
Right.
Arnold had like a roast beef, with the strings around it, and had it, the fat cut off. It was probably about 12 pounds, like a shot put. And there was a line. This is in Santa Monica at a supermarket. There's probably about 12 people in line waiting to get checked out, and they weren't opening up any other registers. So Arnold said, I don't have any time for this. He shot puts the rump roast, the pot roast or whatever, over 12 people's heads. It splats down on the conveyor belt. Everybody turns around and they look up and they say, Arnold, and Arnold said, is there a problem? 22-inch arms are hanging out, and everybody's probably on weed anyways back then, or even now. And no, man, no, it's no problem. I know you're in a rush. And I go on. If you were in New York and you did that, there would have been 12 guns or 12 knives out. You wouldn't have lasted 2 feet to the cash register if you ever did that in New York City. But California, was like laid back, and he got away with it. So that was funny.
And then I heard another story where you were at Arnold's apartment, and guys were getting to go train at Gold's Gym, and he got a letter in the mail, and it had a picture of Sergio with his arm like bigger than his head, and Arnold was like speechless for a second.
Yeah, I'll never forget that. And that was, I think Sergio in a way kind of deserved that. I'm tired, let's rest, when he psyched Sergio off the stage. I think Arnold remembered that photo, because that was Sergio's way of, Sergio had a freakish body. Arnold was gorgeous, like just a much bigger version of Frank Zane, or I'm trying to think of the other one, Flex Wheeler, who, it's unfortunate. I love Flex. And if Flex, I'm not demeaning Flex, I'm trying to give him an applaud. If Flex had my motivation, he never would have been beaten.
Right.
He would be 30 times Mr. Olympia.
Right.
That's the kind of body, that beautiful body that Flex had. That's what Arnold had, but obviously much bigger.
Right.
And when I saw that, I'll never forget. I closed my eyes right now. It was in a manila envelope. It was like an 8x10 glossy, probably one that he signs when he autographs at posing exhibitions. And Arnold looked, and I saw his face just drop. I never saw Arnold that way. I never, ever saw Arnold that way. Although it's interesting, there is one picture also in Essen, in the Mr. Olympia. There's a picture of Sergio hitting the most muscular, turned towards Arnold.
Mm-hmm.
And Arnold's face was on the floor, looking at Arnold, that Sergio with that most muscular. So those are the only two times I ever saw Arnold sort of be human and understand that somebody is psyching you out. And is, when I tell you, John, Sergio, now whether Sergio had a tiny pea head, I don't know. But symmetrically, maybe his head was that much smaller, but I want to give him credit. His arms, it was a front double bicep, each arm, each delt, and each pec. So now we got arms, delts, and pecs. Every one of those body parts dwarfed his head. You're looking at him and go, what the F? How am I going to do this?
Right.
It was, that's another story that's going in the book.
Yeah. Did he sign it? Did Sergio sign it and say, see you at the Olympia?
Yeah, he did. He said, yeah, see you, Arnold, see you at the Olympia.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So did I tell you that, or did somebody else tell you?
I read that in a magazine somewhere.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. I just wanted to see if it was true.
Yeah, there's not too many secrets out there, although there are some, and I'm going to save them for the book, because if not, there won't be anything unique. It'll just be a ramblings of what's already happened.
Right. Let's talk about the book, Pumping Iron Mike, because you didn't know Charles Gaines or George Butler when they came along and they wanted to write a book. And I thought that was a really well done book, and especially talking about the trip that you and Ed Corney took to Baghdad, Iraq, and competing in the Mr. Universe contest there. I thought they did a really good job with that, don't you?
Yeah, the book was great, and that's why they were able to get the backing for the movie, because the book had been so well done. Yeah, that was interesting. I mean, I got off the plane and went through customs in Iraq, and had the Jewish last name, and they took my passport. My father couldn't believe it when I got back. I mean, he says, you never allow a country to take your passport and then give it to you when you leave the country. But I said, what am I going to do? I mean, I'm 20-something years old. They tell you to give their passport. The American officials, Weeder was there and so forth. And I mean, what was I going to do? Get back on a freaking plane and try to go back to America? So, but I mean, the Arab people loved me. You could see the picture of that little boy with the bathrobe looking striped. They call it the marketplace. It's called a souk. The souk in Iraq is a marketplace, and the little boys are running along. They're looking up with a plane in their hand. And our escort from Iraq, God bless him, what a wonderful guy. You can see him with me, kind of following us around. And all we ate was kebabs. And the word shish kebab comes from what they call a kebab, which is meat and vegetables on a stick. I mean, that was all that we ate the entire time. Give us 30 kebabs, and we'd take some of the vegetables off and just eat the meat while we were there. I remember what was amazing is, they had this like royal party for like the heads of government in Iraq and all these dignitaries, and everybody was dressed up. And there was this fish, it was a buffet, like a dinner outside, and there was a fish that had to be like 300-pound fish, and and this was going to be part of the. All of a sudden, after the dignitaries said what they had to say, there was like a little dinner bell that rang, and people died. I'd say it was like piranha. Within 3 minutes, the fish was right down to the freaking bone. Wow. I told Corny, I said, let's get the hell out of here before they think about eating us. I said, let's go get a couple of kebabs, because I'm not fighting in the middle of these crazy people eating the food like they never ate before.
And it looked like when you guys were walking down the street that crowds of people would follow you, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, we were not only Americans, which is different. There's very few Americans that were there. And we were big, huge guys, like 2 times, 3 times bigger than they were.
Yeah.
And they knew the cameras were going, so they knew we were something important. And they had advertised the fact that, the World Championship Mr. Universe was going to be in Baghdad. So, we were kind of like famous people that came to the country.
Right. Hey, what'd you think of What'd you think of Louis Ferrigno when you first? Because you competed with him when he won his first Mr. Universe, right? Or was it second Mr. Universe
Yes,
in Italy?
I did. Yeah, in Switzerland, I think.
Yeah.
That was one of the first times. I think Waller was second and I was third.
Right.
Yeah, Louis was, you know what's interesting, and this is nothing against anybody. I mean, I can tell you easily, have no problem telling you, that I have long legs, and my long legs may help make me a very fast runner. But in trying to be a 20-inch calf kind of guy, and also run a 4.640 with full pads with the New York Jets, I wasn't blocking. You look at Waller. Waller's got shorter thighs. They're rounder. He's got better calves. My calves weren't good. I know that. But I mean, I really did pretty damn good for not having calf implants like maybe somebody else did. You know who. But I won't mention that. That's for the book.
Okay.
And I wonder to myself, why doesn't this guy, what's his name, the German guy, from Germany in the Mr. Olympia with the blonde hair?
Oh, Dennis Wolf.
Huh?
Dennis Wolf?
Yeah, what is, now when Louis, had some cosmetic surgery, it was like maybe 30-inch calves.
Yeah.
That weren't really real.
Right.
So, why don't you go to 22 so that, you can kind of slide by?
Right.
And I just wonder to myself, and I'm not even wondering as a judge, I'm just wondering as like a Dennis Wolf fan, why doesn't, he do something about that? He wins all this money. Now, you don't have to be, if somebody's got a crooked nose and crooked teeth and flat-chested or whatever, you get a little surgery. It's not evil.
Right.
It's just cosmetic. And that's the only thing you can really say about Dennis Wolf that's wrong.
Yeah.
You get down below the knee, and that doesn't make sense.
Right.
I think I'm better. As bad as I was below the knee, I think I'm better than he is.
Right.
So, whatever, people make their own decisions in life, do what they want to do, and you can write 2 articles on how I improved my calves and cross your fingers, writing a great article on new exercise that you found to get your calves. I mean, people will believe.
Right.
But just don't go to, like Louis, don't go to like 30 inches or something, because that's too much.
Right. Hey, let's talk about the 81 Olympia, Mike, because that was the one that Franco won. And I read in stories in the magazines that after the 1980 Mr. Olympia in Australia, Arnold was sort of worried that there was going to be so many people boycotting that show, and that he asked you and guys like Ken Waller to personally to go into the show because he was worried that there wasn't going to be enough people in it.
I can't say that, John, because he never, either I was kind of naive to realize that, but I never had any conversations. I wanted Waller. I wanted to go in drug-free, so I didn't know. I wouldn't have cared if 3 people showed up, and Arnold or Jim Lorimer never called me or ever asked me, because I was going in come hell or high water. I didn't care who was there.
Right.
Now, did we, as a group, help improve the group of competitors? Sure. I have my fans, and maybe they would have gone even if I didn't compete, and Waller maybe as well. But, we had a good group of people there, and it was a good contest, and, somebody had to wait another year before they got a chance to win. I'm not saying anything, but
right. Who is the most impressive Mr. Olympia winner, Mike? Who do you think, out of all the years in the Mr. Olympia history, was the most impressive Mr. Olympia winner?
Gee, I can look at, it's like who's the best baseball player, who was the best home run hitter, Barry Bonds, Babe Ruth, Sammy Sosa, whatever, Ty Cobb in baseball, and, Joe Montana in football. It's really hard to say. I'm a big guy, so would I like big guys, to win? I'm not perfect, and some guys who really weren't perfect, won like me. but were just bigger and better than I was.
Mm-hmm.
So you look at Dorian Yates, and he had flaws. And you look at, Jay Cutler, and he had flaws with his hips being wide. Then you look, but they were great Mr. Olympias. I would say, and again, I'd have to, hopefully I don't rethink it where I want to change the answer after we're done, but maybe I'll get a chance to when I think about it more. But I mean, Arnold's got to be in there.
Yeah.
No question. I mean, Lee Haney is one of the greatest human beings I've ever met. His personality, his being, his soul is better than his body, and his body in its peak was one of the greatest of all time.
Mm-hmm.
So for me to say to you that, and I love Bill Pearl, I love him today. I talk with Dave Draper all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But, Lee Haney is, I don't know, there's just some gleam in his eye. If you ever met him, it would be like you had met him your whole life.
Mm-hmm.
He's so approachable and such a wonderful, wonderful guy.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to leave out other people because some of the nicest people I've ever met. But, when you say a standout of a person in the body, it's Lee Haney.
Yeah.
But again, you've got to include the kid who's Mr. Olympia now.
Phil Easy.
He is Flex Wheeler reborn and 30% bigger.
Yeah.
So that's how, if you had said, okay, explain he's Flex, but 30% more blown up than Flex, bigger, thicker, better, but that beauty of a body, Heath is, Heath is beating some freaks.
Yeah.
And he's not as big as, but he's got a beautiful body. I think somebody will come along who'll be better.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know who or where, but I think, Heath has got to lose himself now.
Yeah.
Because he's put himself out in front and beating everybody in their best shape. So, is he going to get better? Can he get better? Can he stay the same? Obviously, if he can stay the same and everybody else doesn't get better,
yeah,
then, it seems hard for him, to lose.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean he's going to win.
Yeah.
He's got to go out there and prove that he could perform like he did the last 3 years.
Yeah. Okay.
But boy, if my fans out there and the people who listen to the show at some time want me to come back and they have a list of questions that they would like to ask, it would be fun to do it again.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it, and the time really just sped by.
Yeah, it did. All right, Mike Katz, well, thank you very much for joining us, and we really appreciate your stories from the golden age of bodybuilding. We think you're one of the icons in the sport, and we'll always remember you from the book and the movie Pumping Iron. So thank you very much for your time, Mike. I know you're a busy guy, and we appreciate you joining us on the Bodybuilding Legends Show.
It's my pleasure, and hope to have a chance to talk with you again. Thanks for doing such a great job, John.
All right, Mike. Thank you very much.
All right, that's it for the Bodybuilding Legends Show. I want to thank our guest, Mike Katz, for joining us. We'll be back next week with another guest. We got some great guests coming up on the show, including Rich Gaspari, Vince Taylor, Mike Christian, and many others. So stay tuned to the Bodybuilding Legends Show. Share this show with your friends and neighbors, and we'll see you guys next time.